Would you pray with me, please? God, may the words of my mouth, the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you this day, for you are truly our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So this is day 2, week 2, if you will, in this series, Reflections from My Heart on Grace. Last week we talked about G, gratitude. Today we're talking about the R. I've chosen the word redemptive. Now I also invited you last week to come up with your own series of words for the letters in the word grace and work through them on your own. And you're welcome to send your writings to me. But I think it's important that we understand grace for ourselves, not just in a way that someone is speaking or telling us what it is. So that might be a good exercise as you enter into these summer days. Redemptive. Yes, grace upon grace is redemptive. It also, if we look back to last week and fits into this passage that I said would kind of be overarching in all of the work that we do for these 5 weeks, that says, my grace is sufficient for you, and power is given strength through our weakness. This comes from, or our best understanding of this is through the redemptive power of God, right? That all things can be made new. That life itself is generative if we give it the opportunity. I love this story of Nicodemus, and lots of times we don't pay attention to it because in the middle of it is one of the most famous passages in the Bible. For God so loved the world, he sent his only son. That's in the middle of this. But Nicodemus's story is interesting and I think important for us as we think about redemption, as we think about redemptive power and its connection to grace. One of the important things to realize is right at the beginning of this is that Nicodemus comes at night. Now, I don't know how you feel about going places at night. The older I get, the less I like to drive at night. I certainly like to be out in the midst of stars at night, to be able to gaze at the heavens, if you will. But driving in traffic, not so much. Being out and about with lots of people and not really familiar with where I am, not so much. But we're told that Nicodemus goes out at night. Most of the time, and even here in Las Vegas, where at night we have so much light, we also have shadows. Jesus meets with Nicodemus. He also meets us in the midst of the shadows of our lives. No matter what questions we have, just like our story, no matter what we're wondering about or what we're disappointed with or what we don't understand or what we're wanting to change about ourselves, all of the parts of us that perhaps can be hidden in the shadows, Jesus is there with us. Jesus responds to us in those shadowy places, in those places where the light isn't clear and everywhere. That will become important as we go on. So this text goes on to tell us about being born anew, being born again. And Nicodemus has all of these questions. And just the word born, between verse 3 and verse 8, It's mentioned at least 7 or 8 times. Focus? Yeah, I'd say probably. An important part of what's happening here. Jesus is trying to help Nicodemus understand this notion of being born again, not in a physical sense of coming back out through the mother's womb. I'd imagine Jesus is kind of laughing at that particular part. But being made new. The process of being connected, being made right, as we talked about last week, with God. And that comes for us. We're seeing, or we recognize it most often in the form of the cross. We have them in the church. We often wear them around our neck. I explained last week that you will each be given a treasure for your time in these 5 weeks of remembering. For me, the cross is the symbol that I most identify with as far as God's redemptive power, and I suspect you might as well. And so whether you're worshiping online and we get these to you in another way by stopping by the office or perhaps sending them in the mail as in bulk when we get them all together, or in-person worship, I invite you to think about the cross this week. Think about how you hold it, not in a physical sense like this in my hand, but how do you hold it in your heart? How is the cross connected for you to grace? How does that connection work for you? What does it look like? See, I can't answer that for you. That's why I keep giving you guys homework, which has been part of our tradition together. You need to work at your faith, and I hope that you will. So if the symbol is the cross, there are things that we can often get confused about. So here we go back to the text. Jesus says, "If I told you about earthly things and you don't believe, how will you believe if I tell you about heavenly things?" Okay. Honest, fair, and good question, right? If we don't understand what Jesus tells us about earthly things, how on earth will we understand when we're given knowledge or know about heavenly things? We struggle a lot with earthly things. I think we struggle a lot, and that's why we identify Pride Month, and that's why we are a reconciling congregation, because some earthly things don't fit with what we understand to be heavenly things, that love means love, which includes all of God's people. There are some parts of earthly things that want to tell us that that's not true, but we believe that it is. And so you see, we get confused about what the cross can mean, because it might mean something different to you or you. It might mean that I may need to change, be born anew, to move into a way where I truly understand earthly things through God's eyes or through God's heart, connecting us to the grace where power comes from weakness. So you see the importance then of how this may come together. Why do we have these things? Why do we have these questions? Part of what this text offers us, I think, is a question. When we think about being born anew, We might think about being awakened. Oh, I finally understand who Jesus is and why he came. Okay. But maybe it's about, what do you need a do-over in your life for? What do you need to really rethink and redo? Perhaps it is surrounding LGBTQIA plus rights and people in your own life, in your own thinking. Perhaps it is race issues. Again, your own thinking and learning. Perhaps it's politics. Or perhaps it's even women preaching in the pulpit. I hope that you've wrestled enough with that one that it's been okay for me to be here for 4 years. But you see how we learn, and how being born again is a part of almost every day that we have breath. If we really take in what's going on in the world. This text goes on and talks about light again. Remember, I talked about light earlier, that that Nicodemus came in the dark, shadows, it's a little bit of light. It says light came into the world and people loved the darkness more than light. Oh, I think sometimes we do. Just watch the way our newscasts are presented to us with so much darkness. The very last 2 sentences bring us this. All who do wicked things hate the light and don't come to the light for fear that their actions will be exposed to the light. This seems like a clearly important statement to us these days, that evil might be revealed for what it is, that it might have light shone upon it, which I think we're seeing again and again and again. And then this last sentence. Whoever does the truth comes to the light, so that it can be seen that their actions were done in God. Here's the invitation, dear friends. With light, love it, live in it, and offer it to everyone you can. And why? Because we can. Because of the redemptive nature, excuse me, of God. It is because we can live in light and offer it to others that we should. The cross gives us that opportunity. Just like the word born at the beginning of this text, over and over and over and over again. Grace upon grace upon grace. All is made new. We are redeemed by what we do. Amen.